was younger, my father told my brother, sister, and myself that there was a ghost story that happened in a family apartment in Chinatown. Apparently, it had something to do with a friend who was visiting the family from out of town. The story took place in the 1950s or later, and whatever the friend experienced scared her enough that she left in the night and never returned. For a long time, my father denied ever having mentioned that there was a ghost story. Only recently, in seeing that my siblings and I were grown, did he finally admit ever telling the story and gave us the full tale. During the 1950s, my grandparents still owned a large Chinese restaurant on Mott Street. Since it opened until very late, they often came home after closing around 4 in the morning. My father and his siblings often helped out working there and would often come home late as well. It just so happened that a friend of my aunt's was staying over that week. Since my aunt was busy working at the restaurant, her friend relaxed in the family apartment, which had a piano in the living room. One evening, the guest was alone in the apartment and decided to play several songs on the piano. She knew that there was nobody in the apartment and played without disturbance. At a certain point, the guest stopped playing, and when she did, she heard the sound of someone clapping their hands in the same room with her. The guest knew that she was supposed to be alone in the apartment. She was so scared by this that she left before anyone from my family returned from work. Through all the time that I'd spent with people and alone in that apartment, I'd never experienced anything strange at all. One possible explanation may be the thin walls that the old buildings in lower Manhattan have. The building was built in 1886, and the fact that someone in the building's stairwell could hear a lot of what's going on inside the apartment. Could the guests have mistaken the sound of someone clapping in the stairwell with someone in the room? Or were the clapping hands so unmistakably near that there was no mistaking that the invisible person was in the same room? I guess we'll never truly know the answer to that question. Chinatown in Manhattan, New York, is the largest Chinatown in the United States, although fast becoming upserved by 2 additional New York City Chinatowns. Chinatown, Manhattan has a long history from the mid-1800s when the first Chinese immigrants arrived off of Ellis Island. As we all know, different cultures see the world uniquely through their own personal beliefs and customs. Many of the earlier Chinese immigrants arrived from Guangdong province in the south of China. At the time, it was a very poor part of the country that had felt the effects of war, famine, and general unrest. The vast majority of these early immigrants even came from just a few hometowns in that same area. Perhaps it is a unique belief from that part of China, but some of these immigrants believe that ghosts don't have chins. When my grandfather arrived in New York City around 1919, he worked in a grocery store that was owned by his brothers and some relatives on 32 Mott Street. Like many of the stores in New York City today, there was, and still exists, a cellar directly below the store, accessible by a metal door on the sidewalk. These cellars were, and are still used today, as stockrooms for inventories. It was in one of these basements where my grandfather had a very strange experience. One day, my grandfather had to go down the cellar to bring up boxes. Climbing down by himself, there was no one else in the cellar. Although it was during the day, it was still very dark in the recesses of the cellar, which stretched back under the store into the shadows. Midway between moving boxes, my grandfather noticed, out of the corner of his eye, a figure standing in the shadows. My grandfather recalled that the figure gave off a very malevolent presence. Knowing that there should have been no one in the cellar, my grandfather continued facing away from the figure, but kept looking at it from the corner of his eye. My grandfather said, "Who's there?" From the direction of darkness, the figure gave a low and undistinguishable reply, more a mumble than a word. My grandfather knew that the figure would disappear if he looked straight at it, so he tried to get more details of its appearance. The low voice showed that the presence was a man. Its shape was definitely that of a man. My grandfather also noticed the presence had no chin. Surely it was a ghost. Giving in to the urge, my grandfather finally turned his head to look, but there was nothing in the spot where the figure had just been. Knowing of this story as he was growing up, My father also had to frequently enter that same cellar to get things. Sometimes he would look through the corner of his eye into the shadows, but was always disappointed not to see anything. For those of you who live in the New York City area, you might be interested to know that the grocery store is still around. Instead of selling groceries, it's now a gift shop. The original woodwork has not been changed, and the store looks like the same as it did when my grandfather worked there in the early part of the 20th century. It's located on 32 Mott Street. I do know the people who currently run the shop, but I've never mentioned this story to them. Chinese believe in a phenomenon that can be translated into to be weighed down by a ghost. This is a fairly common occurrence in which someone wakes from sleeping to find themselves completely paralyzed but conscious. During these short moments, people often report unexplainable experiences, including hearing voices talking to them, feeling sensations, and hearing people in the room that should not be there. A relative of mine lived in Confucius Plaza in Chinatown, New York City. Those familiar with this part of town will recognize it as the tallest building in Chinatown. This curved brick, 44-story co-op rises at the foot of the Manhattan Bridge entrance and forms a unique wind tunnel. There are many urban legends about Confucius Plaza, which slowly emerged since it was built in the mid-70s. My relative lived alone in his Confucius Plaza apartment, which had a kitchen, bedroom, and living room. On one particular evening, my relative fell asleep on his couch in the living room. He later woke to find himself totally paralyzed and unable to even open his eyes. As he lay there, he heard someone enter through his front door, walk through every room of his apartment, and leave through the front door, slamming it as they left. At the moment the door slammed, my relative was suddenly able to move again and immediately sprang up. He opened the front door, but saw no one going down the long hallway. He searched through the entire apartment and found nothing missing or disturbed. In the summer of 2011, I accompanied my uncle back to the US. He now lives in Iowa. I spent a week with his family before returning back to the Philippines. On my return trip, I decided to take a few more days off and see the sights of Chicago. I've been to the US on numerous occasions, but this was my very first to Chicago. I was looking so forward to baseball and food. I booked a room at the Congress Plaza Hotel because of its accessibility and reasonable rate. It was close to subways, where I could go with ease to a Sox game at Comiskey Park and to O'Hare for my flight home. The hotel is quite old, and it looks old. You can hear it creak in some areas. The room I was assigned to was on the 4th floor, I think. It was on a corner, and you could see Roosevelt University on East Congress Parkway when you look out the window. The hallway outside leading up to my room was always eerily quiet. The first night after I got back from eating out, the room became really cold. I thought it was really strange because it was nice and warm outside. Also, it got cold suddenly, but not gradually. I ended up sleeping with the bed sheet, blanket, and bed cover on top. It was cold just that one night. I would be out during the day to explore the city and get back after dinner. Every time I got to my room, some of my stuff would be moved. I initially thought it was the cleaners, so I hung a do not disturb sign outside my door. I would still get back to my room with my stuff moved. Nothing was missing though. All my stuff was accounted for. What validated the rumors I've heard that this place is haunted was when I saw a shadow figure. There was a dresser at the foot of my bed with a biggish mirror. While in bed one night, recalling my visit to Chicago's Field Museum that day, I saw reflected on the mirror a shadow. It was peeking out from the bathroom door that was slightly ajar. The lights were off inside the bathroom, but I could still make out a distinct human shape. It was darker than the dark bathroom, but it was solid. I stared at the reflection for I don't know how long. I couldn't really tell if it was staring back at me, as it had no face, but somehow I had the feeling that it was spying on me. There was just solid blackness where a face should have been. I blinked to make sure I wasn't just seeing things, and sure enough, it was still there. I got out of bed to confront it. Honestly, I'm not sure what I was thinking then, but it vanished. I I went back to bed, looked at the mirror again. It was no longer there. Has anyone been to this same hotel and experienced these? Thanks for reading.